All right, guess who just showed up? The UPS man. So I couldn't wait even to get these boxes in the garage. So let's do a quick unbox just to give you guys a little bit of a taste for what's in these boxes. So let's do it. The box says fragile, handle with care, but we see how much care was handled. And it took me about 11 weeks to get these, but they finally showed up. Oh, there's a little preview of what's inside. Hi, how are you? My name is Dan Dulac and welcome back to my channel where the current big project I'm working on is a V10 powered Ultima Evolution convertible. This is episode number 35. If you missed any of the previous 34 episodes, we have gone on quite the journey to this point. And on this episode, I have got some major updates to share with you. Namely, I finally got back my exhaust system. I had my entire exhaust system, the custom headers I made, as well as the X-pipe and catback system, completely shielded with Headershield on it. So I cannot wait to show you that. I've also done a few other small updates. We've got the engine we're gonna be putting back in the car, the transmission, getting all the plumbing buttoned up and tightened down and ready for fluids. So we've got a lot to share on this episode. I can't wait to show you. So let's dive right in. An episode or two ago, you guys saw I made up these speed sensor rings here that I will use on the rear axle of the car. A bunch of people commented, great comments by the way, asking me why didn't I do it in one piece? Why didn't I just have this cut on one side and whatnot? So what did I end up doing was I actually had some foresight and I had a couple of these cut. I only need one. And I'll show you the finished product here in a second. But what I ended up doing was just welding one side here and grinding it smooth so that it was perfect. And then I just bent it out of the way slightly so I could slip it over the axle and then slide it on to the CV joint. And then that will just help me keep this ring a little bit more concentric on the actual CV joint. So let me show you what I got in the finished result. Oh, and by the way, that's not stainless steel. These rings are not stainless steel. These are cold rolled mild steel. So a very ferrous metal, which will work great for the pickup on the speed sensor. So here's what I ended up with. You can see, I don't know if I can find the seam here. The weld seam. There's the non-welded seam right there. So again, the fit is really good. And it is much more concentric. So if I just flip it to the other side, this is the side that I welded. Grounded off real nice. You really can't even tell that there was a weld joint there. So thanks for the tips, guys. I very much appreciate it. That makes for a nice clean setup and it makes this ring super, even more concentric and because it's now one piece instead of two. So very cool. All right, well, I'm getting the wiring going here on the interior. What I want to do is I'm going to mount my Motec C127 display ultimately on the finished dash, like in this area, center mounted in between the driver and passenger on the dash. It is a 7-inch display, so it is a little bit bulky to put in front of the steering wheel in order to, again, visually see the entire screen. So I'm just gonna mount it here center-wise. I think that'll look pretty cool. And while I don't have the front cowl on the area yet, I do wanna mount the dash. So I went back and I designed a simple dash mount. The Motec display will simply bolt to this 3D printed part. This is made of PETG, a little bit stronger than PLA, but pretty cheap and prints well. So what I did was I made some 1-inch roll bar mounting brackets, and what I'll do is put some heat set thread inserts in here and then simply screw these in right over this roll bar, this chassis tube member here. This is 1 inch diameter, and ultimately I'll just put this here. Again, this is just a temporary mount so I can complete the wiring, obviously test all the electronics, get the engine started and so forth, and have the display so I can see all the telemetry data on the engine. So this, let me get out the Motec display and show you how this will go on. I love Motec's trick packaging. So here is the display. Turn this over like that so you can see there's 3 mounting pins, and I had to make provisions for the cable holes just like you see here. And then so this should just slide right over just like that. So that'll be sweet. Mount this thing up, and again, this is just a temporary mounting bracket until I get the dash fiberglass installed and finished up. So, all right, cool. Let's get this mounted up. Well, back to the drawing board. As I thought, these little brackets, they were a little bit too flimsy on the corner, and when the weight of the C127 display and any bouncing as I test drive this car, this was the weak spot. So I put it on there. Sure enough, these things broke. So anyway, what I did was back to the drawing board, this one together. Much more substantial stanchions that will bolt right to that chassis tube, just like that. So way more heavy duty. That should hold it no problem, and we should be good to go. So let's get this installed. All right, for a temporary setup, I think that will work just fine. Much more solid base. That's not going anywhere. So perfect, that'll be good enough for getting it on the dyno, testing, doing some light runs down the street. Should be just good, but once I get the fiberglass dash installed, then I'll mount this proper into that using, I don't know, probably a carbon fiber shroud or something. I'll figure that out as I go, but this will get me started. These are the headers. If anybody's interested, this is the company who did the work for me, based out of Illinois, Headershield. They did all the work. They were super backed up, and it took me about 11 weeks to get these, but they finally showed up. So here we go. There it is, fully shielded exhaust system. Header system. detail is awesome. Little pieces they put down in here to cover up some gaps in between the runners. Little pieces in here. That looks really, really good. I am so pumped at how this exhaust turned out. It's a shame though that all these runners are going to be basically hidden on the underside of the engine. This is really the only part you'll see on the outside, but the quality of the seams here is incredible. I don't know how they do this technique, but it looks super cool and should work great for insulating the exhaust. All right, speaking of thermal characteristics, I actually found a video on YouTube from LN Engineering. They put a Porsche Cayman up on a dyno and checked the surface temperature of the exhaust, both with and without the heat shielding on. And check out these results. I'll link the video in the description below, but check this out. Max temperature at high RPM load, 835 degrees Fahrenheit, 446 C, whereas compared to the protected heat shielded exhaust system, surface temp of just 216 degrees at a peak further down the line once heat soak set in of 253 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can see the Celsius conversion there I put up there on the chart, but go check out that video. These are some very, very impressive results. On the X pipe over here, they filled in this nicely, looks like a strip right down the middle, and even on the joints, it's tacked in there beautifully. So now it's time for reassembly. We put the headers back on the engine, get the trans back in the chassis, then the engine, put the catback system on. Let's start to get this engine bay buttoned up. Finally, fingers crossed for the last time. All right, the first to go in is the transmission. So we're gonna put that in first. And one of the things I did, I actually remembered, thankfully, before putting the trans back in again, is the drain and fill tube on the back of the transmission actually intersects with this cross member here, this diagonal bar that's in here. I remembered seeing that back when I had the transmission in the first 10 times or so, and what I did was I put in one of these removable joints. So if you guys remember back when I worked on the fuel tanks, in order to make the fuel pump removable, I actually put in the same removable 1-inch brackets here so that I can make that cross member removable. I did the exact same thing down here. So that'll work out well. So then I can, with the transmission in, I can simply unbolt the 2 cap head screws here, 2 cap head screws here, and then this will just drop right out from the bottom, and that'll give me access to the drain and fill port on that transmission. I don't know if there's any fluid in this trans, but I'm gonna check it anyway once we get it in place and situated. right, wrestled the transmission back in its home for the final time. Now we're gonna put on the headers before I drop the engine back in place. One of the things I figured I'd show you guys real quick. So I had bought original exhaust gaskets, manifold gaskets for this, when I thought I had installed them for the final time. I did buy another brand new set, so no worries there, but I wanted to show you the wear pattern on this. Even from just bolting down the manifolds on here, you could see where they're making good contact with this gasket. So that's a good sign that it's flat and it's gonna seal really, really nice against the gasket here. So pretty psyched about that. There's good mating surfaces there. So unfortunately, I burned through a set of those. I'm just gonna save these just in case. I don't know if I can't remember if they're reusable or not, but in any event, I did get another set because I do see there's a bevel around the port on there, and I've since flattened those out on this. There's still a little bit of a bevel there, but they're a little bit more flat, so I'm not gonna risk it. Just put in a new set and be done with it. So let's get these manifolds installed. Alright, we've got the header on and I've got all but one of the exhaust flange bolts on there. Even with the coating, there's enough room to get a socket in there on each one of these, except for the one that's right behind here. Now, fortunately, the alternator is here, engine mount is here. It's perfectly spaced right in between, so I can get my hand up there just enough to start it, which I did, and then I'm gonna get a ratcheting wrench and get that one. I don't know if you could see it. There it is, right up there. So it's tucked in there. I guess 1 out of 6 ain't bad, and we'll put a ratcheting wrench. The other side is the exact same. It's just enough for me to get my hand up in there to get it started, and then get a ratcheting wrench from underneath here, and I think there's enough movement where I can get at least 1 or 2 clicks on a ratcheting wrench. I won't be able to torque that to the spec. It's only, I think, ultimately 30 Newton meters final torque, so it's not a huge amount of torque on there, but the rest I can torque, and that should be good to go. Here's the torque data on these manifold bolts. You do them in order from, looks like, front of the motor to the back, 1 through 6. Start with them by hand, then 1 through 6 in that order, 20 Newton meter, and then 1 through 6 in that order to 30 Newton meter. So again, not a huge amount of torque on these. So that number 5, I think, that I could barely reach, that should be all right. I'll just do my best and make it happen. All right, here she is. The rear end of the car is pretty much buttoned up and ready for fluids. It came out amazing. So you can see certainly the big standout is the exhaust system here that is all shielded, ready to go. I've got the carbon fiber air boxes back in place. And one of the things I did off camera is I actually made another set of these 3.5-inch intake tubes using high temperature silicone. High temperature epoxy. So these will withstand the heat really well. And then again, based on some feedback on a few videos ago, I put the mass sensors in the side rather than coming up from the bottom. This is how they were oriented on the OEM setup. So had to extend the harness a little bit, but not a big deal. So now those mass sensors are coming in the side. So this really looks nice. It's very clean and simple. A lot of the wiring is hidden. I do have obviously a ton of wiring to do in the cockpit side, but the main looms coming from the engine harness come through there. And of course, I'll have to do the wiring on the rear clam for the lights, the rear tail lights and reverse light and so forth, but that's really easy to do. So that is the rear end. I'm really excited how that came out. And one of the things I actually found, there was actually a recall on the 2017, 2018 R8s and Huracans. And the recall, because this engine is from 2017, and the recall is for these breather tubes. This is actually a breather hose that connects to the transmission. And when the transmission gets hot, fluid will come up and consume and fill some of these tubes. Well, the original tube was just a single tube. And I guess under real spirited driving conditions where the transmission gets really hot, you had some overflow of engine transmission fluid coming out, and obviously it's in a hot area that could catch fire. So I searched for the recalls on the 2017 model year and actually found this recall. So I've got these are the new tubes, basically double the capacity for fluid overflow. So that should be fine, and I'm glad I found it. So that's the only other major update here. I also removed, if you remember back before I had these shielded, I had some heat shielding here, which was kind of covering up the headers. I decided not to put that back on, given that I do have this shielding, and I've got the same shielding on the top of the gas tank. I might put some of the gold DEI tape just on the bars, the chassis tubes there, just to protect that on both sides. But other than that, I think it's going to be fine. Again, given the really good insulating job this shielding does on this exhaust system. So with the rear end here buttoned up for the most part, what I'm going to do is now focus 100% of my attention on the wiring in the cockpit, getting my Motec C127 display hooked up and connected so I can get telemetry data and get the wiring to the point where I can put power to the systems and the switches, and we can do a first start on this car. So I'm going to have to take trailer this over to a local tuner. He is the guy who actually took my ECUs and deleted the immobilizers out of the ECU boards, and we're going to delete some of the other OBD functions as well, the secondary CATs, the secondary O2 sensors, etc., etc. So a little bit of coding to do there, but the goal is to get a first start, get some fluids in this thing, and let it rip on a first start. And we'll be doing that here very soon. So cannot wait to show you guys that.